Any band can put out a good album. It takes a real legend to never put out a bad one.
Flawless victory.
These are 12 flawless bands with no bad albums, and we're starting with Enslaved. Now, I can't say enough about just how amazing this band is, and they only seem to get better year after year. From the debut right there on the wall behind me, all the way to this year with Heimdall, they have never released a bad or even mediocre release. As I said in my tier list, there are some I definitely enjoy better than others, but every single one of them has something special and different to offer. And that's an important point because a lot of really consistent bands, even the ones on this very list, tend to sort of put the same album out over and over again. That's simply not true for Enslaved. Want some classic second wave black metal? Listen to Frost. Some highly technical riffing? Mardrome. Folky stuff with Viking themes? Bloodhem. Moody progressive stuff? Issa. You get the idea. I could go on, but suffice it to say that I think this band has possibly the best discography in all of metal.
Prove me wrong, kids. Prove me wrong.
Next up is Dark Tranquillity. Not really too far behind Enslaved, to be honest. Another one of my all-time favorite bands, and another one with a pretty lengthy discography, which I always like to factor in since quality tends to diminish with quantity. Once more, there are some albums I listen to less than others, like Projector and We Are the Void, but even those have their seriously strong moments, like Therein on the former. And furthermore, they all kind of have their own personalities despite maintaining the same overall thread when it comes to their sound. They've got one of the greatest foundational 90s albums in melodic death metal in The Gallery, but also perhaps the greatest run of albums of the 2000s as well in Damage Done, Character, and Fiction. Seriously, the genre may never top that trilogy, and I'm fine with that. Next up is Meshuggah. So here's one of those bands that you could argue more or less make the same thing over and over again, but one, they basically invented their entire genre, so I can forgive that, and two, even though they stick to that baseline of polyrhythmic gent, there's still some variance to be found if you're paying attention. Contradictions Collapse honestly has a lot of clear reference points to Metallica, and those thrash influences continue into the jazzier, more progressive Destroy, Erase, Improve, and the atom bomb that is Chaosphere. Nothing is where things really take a turn for that more bassy, molasses emphasis on groove. Catch 33 gets more experimental, while touring with Tool seemed to rub off on some of the riffs of Obscene. Then there's another personal favorite in Koloss, which is just a wrecking ball of a record. All the way up to today, they have never failed to have one of my most listened records of any year.
I can't stop.
Then we have the Dillinger Escape Plan. When I first did this was easily the most egregious omission. A little unfair when compared to some of the other bands, given that they only have 6 albums and a handful of EPs, but goddamn did they hang it up on a high note, with every single one of them being worthy of at least a 9 out of 10. Calculating Infinity basically wrote the rule book for mathcore, and then they put out one of my all-time favorite extended plays with Mike motherfucking Patton. I'm the best you'll ever have! Only to top themselves again with Greg taking over on vocals for Miss Machine, which I'd argue changed the entire trajectory of my musical tastes. Ire Works, Option Paralysis, One of Us is the Killer, every single one of them packed with wall-to-wall ragers and always with some surprises to keep you on your toes. And ending on one of the most stirring swan songs of all time too, with Dissociation. Long live the Kings. Next up is Deftones. Bit of a lighter pick here, but unlike so many of my other favorite bands from high school that have long since fallen off, you can check out the video I did for those bands, these guys have maintained their spot all the way up to present day. Fans know I like to meme on Gore, but even that's an interesting album in its own right, and it's far from bad. And then outside of that, you've got some of the finest albums in nu metal that still hold up, with Adrenaline and Around the Fur. My all-time favorite with the increased experimentation and boundary pushing of White Pony, an album that I still put in my top 25 overall, and then still impressing me with some of their best work on the likes of Koi no Yokan and Ohms. Love them or hate them, but I feel like you have to respect the legacy that they've built from pretty humble beginnings. Then we have Carcass. Another new addition this time around. Not only is this band consistently incredible, they've managed to top out my rankings list across genres due to how much they've toyed with different styles over the years. Now, I'll admit that I don't care much for the muddy mess that is Reek of Putrefaction, but then again, neither does guitarist Bill Steer, and outside of that, it's all golden for me. They stepped up their game in a big way with Symphonies of Sickness, and then flexed their progressive chops with Necroticism. And then, as if to say, hold my beer, they followed that already impressive display up with one of the most important melodic death metal albums of all time in Heartwork. And after a long hiatus, they've also had one of the greatest comebacks of all time, in my opinion, with Surgical Steel and Torn Arteries. I know some people shit on Swan Song, but I even find the more death and roll stylings of that album to be very entertaining.
We have fun. We just have fun.
Next up is Periphery. Periphery 1 really kicked off the gent music as it pertains to metalcore, and somehow, in spite of all the copycats since then, they still managed to be the best at it thanks to constantly growing and evolving their sound. Periphery 2 is easily one of the best progressive metalcore albums of all time, following that up with an ambitious concept double album that took time to grow on me, but now I absolutely love. Periphery 3 and 4 found them further improving their performances and songwriting skills with increasingly progressive arrangements while also incorporating symphonic elements and other new tricks. They even had the balls to open Hail Stan with a 20+ minute progressive opus. And now in 2023 with Periphery 5, reactions continue to be divisive, but they continue to wow me with both some of their heaviest and most complex songs to date. Then we have the Black Dahlia Murder. Arguably a poster child of putting out the same album over and over again, but they do it so well I'm always excited for the next one. I still enjoy listening to Unhallowed as much as when I first heard it in 2003, and they only got better from there with Miasma and instant classic Nocturnal. I'm also partial to Ritual, which might just be a perfect album, and Nightbringers even managed to surprise me, being arguably one of their fastest and heaviest albums of all, thanks in part to lead guitarist Brandon Ellis really bringing his A game. I'll admit that it took me a bit to get into Everblack, and I understand why Abysmal is pretty consistently named their worst, but once more, a bad The Black Dahlia Murder album is still better than most mid-tier modern albums in the genre. Very sad at the loss of the very talented and all-around stand-up Trevor Sternad, but the impact he left will continue to resonate on bands for years to come. Then we have Protest the Hero. Another shorter but very consistent discography from these Canadian legends. A friend of mine in college got me into these guys with Kazaya when I was first digging deeper into mathcore bands, and I was totally blown away by the guitar work on these records. Like, absolutely insane. Both melodious but also highly technical. Fortress only increased their songwriting skills, which I think they further mastered on Volition, which is another easy 10 out of 10 for me.
It's a long ride home, but it's always my destination.
Honestly though, their 2020 album Palimpsest may even have topped that in some ways since then with its ambition. And I haven't even talked about what a great frontman Rhodey Walker is. Powerful voice and great lyricism that always manages to perfectly balance and blend earnest emotion, topical stories, and a great sense of humor. No bad albums, honestly very few even mediocre songs.
Good luck finding one.
Next up is Converge. Blood Moon, man. Holy shit. Like, talk about evolving and keeping your fans on their toes. I wasn't really expecting them to reinvent themselves as an atmospheric collab with Chelsea Wolfe and Stephen Brodsky of Cave-In and Mutoid Man this late in their career, but damned if they didn't pull it off. And all of that while also managing to still be one of the greatest bands in a genre that they helped to kick off all the way back in the 90s. Then they set the 2000s metalcore blueprint with Jane Doe, and from then on, album after album managed to remain relevant with kick-in-the-door releases like You Fail Me, Axe to Fall, and All We Love We Leave Behind. The Dusk in Us also hit me just as hard as Jane Doe did back in high school, once more dealing with themes that were extremely relevant for me at the time. Then we have Every Time I Die. Another metalcore group, but the first to really fuse that sound with southern fried riffs. It's a combination I never would have thought up, much less thought would work, but somehow those sounds go together like peanut butter and jelly.
How is this possible?
Also a great union of mathy, more technical arrangements with those more melodic, soaring passages. Add Keith Buckley's chaotic vocals and sardonic sense of humor, and this is a band that with every album manages to make me rage, tear up, and laugh out loud in equal percentages. Really sad how things went down after the release of Radical, which I might add may be among their best, even alongside classics like Hot Damn, Gutter Phenomenon, and New Junk Aesthetic. Keith is irreplaceable as a vocalist if you ask me, because in my mind, the two defining elements of this band really are those riffs and his very trademark style of delivery. But once again, even if this is the end for that band, they left a hell of a catalog to revisit for years to come. And then there's Between the Buried and Me. Another band that really has kind of done it all and just continues to blow me away. Going all the way back to 2003 when I first heard The Silent Circus, I had never heard such a blender of influences from extreme to alternative, all coming together in one chaotic singularity of noise. It really blew my teenage mind. Then watching them mature that sound with more progressive influences on classics like Alaska and Colors, I spent many a treadmill run in the dorm gym listening to that one. Getting more cosmic with Parallax, and then basically doing their own Night at the Opera with the conceptual Coma Ecliptic. Getting a bit wild and eclectic with the two-part Automata, and then still delivering arguably some of their most stunning and ambitious material in Colors too. I mean, how often does a band make a sequel to one of their most beloved albums and actually pull it off? And I'm grateful to say that it's all just as amazing live. Y'all check out this video for some of my old favorites that fell off, or this playlist for discography rankings of many of these bands and more, but that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.